In March 1998, authorities in Marysville, Washington began investigating the violent death of 19-year-old Jennifer Dawn Brinkman. On March 21, 1998, Brinkman's father returned with his then-girlfriend from a week-long vacation to their family home on the 1900 block of Grove Street in Marysville. When they arrived, they discovered Jennifer's body inside her bedroom. The local sheriff's office and Marysville Police Department responded to the scene. Investigators determined that she had been the victim of a homicide. Jennifer Brinkman was born in 1978 and grew up in the Marysville area. She was described by investigators and acquaintances as a sociable and outgoing young woman. In the months leading up to her death, she spent time walking locally, visiting the library, and using telephone dating and chat lines that were common in the 1990s. Evidence gathered from her room, including personal writings, indicated that she had been communicating with people through these services as she sought companionship. At the crime scene, detectives found a bloody axe with a wooden handle near Brinkman's bed. The axe was believed to be the murder weapon. The wounds on her neck and body were consistent with an attack delivered with such a tool. Recorded statements from police reports indicated that Brinkman had likely been dead for several days before her father returned from the trip. There was no obvious sign of forced entry into the home, leading investigators to consider that she may have known her attacker or allowed them inside voluntarily. Investigators collected physical evidence at the scene, including the axe and items of biological material that appeared to belong to an unknown male. At that time, forensic DNA analysis was in its earlier stages, and although police were able to create a DNA profile from the evidence, there was no match to any known individual in law enforcement databases. Leads generated during the initial investigation did not produce a suspect who could be arrested or charged, and the case gradually became a cold case. In the immediate aftermath of Jennifer's death, police in Marysville canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed residents, and combed through possible leads, including individuals she had communicated with on phone chat lines. Among the evidence collected was a letter dated March 10, 1998, addressed to Brinkman with a return address that investigators later associated with the suspect's residence in Bellevue. This letter suggested some form of prior contact between Brinkman and an individual whose name would later emerge in the case. For decades, the Marysville Police Department continued to maintain the case file, reviewing tips and leads over the years. However, without a suspect tied to the DNA evidence, authorities were unable to move the investigation forward beyond periodic reviews. Jennifer's father continued to seek answers, but he died in 2013 without learning who had killed his daughter. In the early 2020s, advances in DNA technology and forensic genetic genealogy provided an opportunity to re-examine the evidence in the Brinkman cold case. Genetic genealogy involves extracting a detailed DNA profile from evidence and comparing it with genetic data in public databases to identify possible relatives of the unknown suspect. This method has been used successfully in a growing number of cold case investigations across the United States. Marysville investigators submitted the DNA evidence, including the sample associated with the murder weapon, for analysis through advanced testing by a private forensic laboratory. The DNA profile developed from the evidence was compared to databases that contain genetic information from numerous individuals who have voluntarily submitted their DNA for ancestry or genealogy purposes. By identifying potential familial matches and constructing family trees, investigators were able to narrow the field of possible suspects. In late 2022, the Marysville Police Department announced that they had identified a suspect in the 1998 cold case homicide of Jennifer Brinkman using the results of these advanced DNA and genetic genealogy techniques. On November 28, 2022, law enforcement arrested a 52-year-old man from Renton, Washington, later identified as Jeffrey Paul Primo. He was booked into the Snohomish County Jail and charged with first-degree murder in connection with Brinkman's death. Authorities stated that Primo had been living and working in the East Puget Sound area at the time of the killing and continued to live in the region in the decades since. Detectives noted that he had been one of several individuals investigators had focused on during the long investigation, but earlier technological limitations hindered efforts to conclusively tie him to the crime. Police believe that Brinkman and the suspect had met through one of the telephone dating or chat line services she used in the months before her death. Investigators found evidence that Primo had written to Brinkman shortly before her murder and had attempted to make plans to meet her. The callback number left on Brinkman's mother's voicemail was associated with the number the suspect used during his initial contact with her. In an interview in 1999, the suspect told police that he spoke with many women on chat lines but denied personal contact with Jennifer. Following his arrest in 2022, Primo was held in the Snohomish County Jail. Bail was set at $250,000 and he was scheduled to appear for arraignment and subsequent court proceedings related to the first-degree murder charge. At the time of his arrest, law enforcement officials stated publicly that while DNA and genealogy evidence linked him to the crime, the investigative and legal processes would continue as the case progressed through the judicial system. Police have not publicly disclosed a clearly defined motive for the killing. Investigators have characterized Jennifer as a friendly and outgoing person who was actively seeking companionship, and they believe that her interactions through chat lines played a role in how she met the suspect. However, details about why the suspect attacked her remain part of the ongoing judicial inquiry. Marysville Police Chief Eric Skyerpon stated that solving the Brinkman cold case was a priority for the department and that detectives had maintained interest in the case throughout the decades. He noted that advances in DNA technology and genetic genealogy offered an opportunity to bring answers to the victim's family and the community. Skyerpon referenced the persistent commitment by investigators to revisit and re-examine old evidence as crucial to achieving the breakthrough. The Washington State Attorney General's office provided financial assistance for the forensic genetic genealogy testing that played a role in identifying the suspect. The program had supported numerous cold case investigations, offering funding for advanced DNA analysis in cases where traditional forensic methods had been exhausted. Investigators and community members expressed that the family's loss had been compounded by the absence of answers for nearly a quarter-century. The discovery of a suspect decades later offered a degree of closure for some as the judicial process worked toward determining legal accountability. The victim's father's passing before the case was solved illustrated how the impact of violent crime can extend across generations. The case of Jennifer Brinkman reflects a broader pattern in law enforcement in which cold cases from the 20th century have been re-examined using modern forensic techniques. Genetic genealogy and advanced DNA testing have become tools that allow detectives to pursue leads that were previously inaccessible, enabling the identification of suspects who might otherwise have remained unknown. As of the latest public reports, the suspect was in custody awaiting legal proceedings on the first-degree murder charge. The use of advanced DNA methods marked a significant development in the case and demonstrated how evolving technology can affect investigations long after a crime was committed. The judicial process that follows arrest includes pre-trial hearings, potential motion practice, and possible trial through which evidence will be presented and legal arguments made. The Jennifer Brinkman cold case, spanning more than 20 years, offers a record of how law enforcement adapted its approach to investigation with the emergence of new scientific tools. From the initial collection of physical evidence in 1998 to the use of genetic genealogy in the early 2020s, the case underscores the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining investigative focus even when a crime initially defies resolution.
On January 24, 1980, law enforcement officers in Great Bend, Kansas were called to the Nelson Trailer Park, a mobile home community west of the city near the airport, after a report of a violent incident at a residence there. When officers arrived at the trailer occupied by Mary Robin Walter, they found her body inside the home. Mary Robin Walter was 23 years old at the time of her death. She had been shot multiple times, and the scene was treated as a homicide. A .22 caliber handgun was recovered at the scene and later confirmed to be the murder weapon. Walter was married and a mother of one young child. She was also a nursing student attending Barton County Community College when she was killed. The initial investigation was led by the Barton County Sheriff's Office with assistance from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation and the Great Bend Police Department. Detectives conducted interviews with witnesses, interviewed people in the neighborhood, and collected physical evidence. Among those questioned was a then 25-year-old neighbor named Stephen L. Hanks, who lived near Walter's residence at the time of the killing and became a person of interest early in the inquiry. Despite this, investigators were unable to identify sufficient evidence to charge anyone with the murder, and the case soon went cold. Over the intervening years, numerous law enforcement officers reviewed the file, but no charges were filed, and the case remained unresolved for decades. For many years, the circumstances of Walter's death remained a mystery to her family and the community. The trailer park where she was killed no longer exists, and many of the detectives and witnesses connected to the original investigation had either retired or died over time. Without new leads or conclusive forensic connections to a suspect, the case continued without resolution. Walter's daughter was only a young child when her mother was killed, and her husband and other family members have expressed that they lived for years without learning who was responsible for the crime. In April 2022, Barton County Sheriff Brian Bellender authorized a renewed review of the case. Detective Sergeant Adam Hales, working with the Sheriff's Office, began re-examining the original evidence and investigative materials from 1980. Hales and other officers assigned to the review discovered that certain information initially collected had been overlooked or misfiled, and new investigative techniques and contemporary forensic methods offered an opportunity to re-examine the unsolved murder with fresh eyes. After compiling and organizing decades of accumulated documents and evidence, investigators found new or previously unexamined information that could support renewed investigative action. In October 2022, law enforcement located additional evidence relevant to the case. Although officials declined to publicly specify the precise nature of the evidence, they indicated it was significant enough to warrant obtaining an arrest warrant. Based on the refreshed examination of the case file and the newly discovered evidence, Barton County Attorney's Office personnel and the sheriff's investigators presented information to a judge that resulted in the issuance of an arrest warrant for Stephen L. Hanks on a second-degree murder charge. Hanks was located living in Burden, Kansas, and on December 8, 2022, he was arrested on the warrant. Hanks was 68 years old at the time of his arrest. In the years between Walter's death in 1980 and Hanks's arrest in 2022, Hanks had a criminal history that included multiple charges unrelated to Walter's murder. Shortly after the killing of Walter, he was arrested in 1981 and later charged with rape, battery, robbery, and burglary. He was convicted and sentenced in 1983 and discharged from custody in 1993. These convictions and offenses were documented in the Kansas Department of Corrections records and were part of the background considered by law enforcement as they re-evaluated his possible connection to Walter's homicide decades later. After Hanks's arrest on the cold case warrant in December 2022, the Barton County District Court scheduled preliminary hearings. In April 2024, Hanks was bound over on the second-degree murder charge following a preliminary hearing where the state presented evidence sufficient to establish probable cause. The case then proceeded into formal criminal proceedings. Later that year, on August 8, 2024, Hanks entered a plea agreement in the Barton County District Court. Under the 1980 Kansas statutes that govern sentencing for second-degree murder at the time of the crime, the plea agreement provided for a sentence with a minimum of 5 years and a maximum of 25 years. At the sentencing hearing on September 12, 2024, the presiding judge departed from the negotiated minimum in the plea agreement and imposed a sentence requiring Hanks to serve at least 10 years before becoming eligible for release. The maximum term imposed remained 25 years. Hanks will serve his sentence under the terms of the state's sentencing structure applicable at the time of the offense. Authorities and court records indicate that the judge's decision to increase the minimum term reflected considerations of the nature of the crime and the passage of time before resolution. Walter's murder, which occurred more than 44 years before the conviction, is believed by local law enforcement officials to be the oldest cold case in Kansas to be solved and to result in a conviction. Barton County Sheriff Brian Bellender noted that the case had haunted law enforcement in the area for decades, and the resolution brought a sense of closure to an investigation that had remained open as evidence and resources would allow. He also acknowledged the difficulty in securing attention and funding for such an old, unsolved case in a rural county, and shared that it was the dedication of detectives who took a fresh look at the evidence that ultimately led to the breakthrough. In announcing the arrest and subsequent conviction of Hanks, Walter's family members expressed a mixture of relief and sorrow. Her niece, speaking on behalf of the family, described the news as bittersweet, noting that many of those who knew Robin personally, including her parents, husband, and a sister, had already died before the case was resolved. The family noted that they were grateful for law enforcement's efforts to bring Robin's murderer to justice after decades without answers, and that the impact of losing her had shaped their lives in lasting ways. At the time of the homicide in January 1980, Walter was a young wife and nursing student who balanced educational pursuits with the responsibilities of raising her daughter. Her death left a profound effect on the small community in Great Bend, and her case became one of the lingering unsolved homicides that local detectives and sheriff's deputies continued to revisit whenever investigative opportunities arose. The mobilization of multiple agencies, including the Barton County Sheriff's Office, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, and the Great Bend Police Department, reflected a sustained interest over many years in resolving one of the community's most perplexing crimes. The reopening of the case exemplifies a broader trend in law enforcement where cold homicides are reevaluated with contemporary investigative methods and techniques that expand upon what was available at the time of the original crime. Much of the renewed progress in the Walter investigation came through meticulous review of old reports, interviews with individuals connected to the case, and the willingness to pursue new lines of evidence that had been overlooked. Although modern forensic tools such as advanced DNA testing are not specifically cited in public reporting as being central to this case's break, the practice of reviewing physical and testimonial evidence with modern prosecutorial standards was central to advancing the matter toward arrest and conviction. Despite the conviction and sentence of Hanks, law enforcement officials continue to emphasize the importance of persistence in reaching answers in cold cases. The Mary Robin Walter murder remained unsolved for more than 40 years, a testament to the challenges investigators face when evidence and resources are limited. The case underscored how unresolved homicides can remain open on agency files for generations, and how institutional memory, documentation, and periodic review are essential to ensure that old cases can be re-examined when new opportunities arise. The sentencing of Hanks in September 2024 brought an official legal conclusion to the Mary Robin Walter cold case, providing the community and the victim's surviving relatives with a measure of accountability and closure. While the passage of more than 40 years meant that many who remembered Walter personally were no longer alive to witness the resolution, the conviction served as a formal recognition of responsibility for her death. The case remains an example in Kansas of a cold case that was ultimately resolved through the persistence and dedication of law enforcement professionals committed to seeking justice even after substantial time has elapsed.